tariffs, there's been a lot of on and off, some inconsistency.
There's no inconsistency. I'm not like a block that just, I won't delay. It's called flexibility. It's not called inconsistency. It's called flexibility.
Imagine July 2025. It's a typical morning in the port of Kitimat, British Columbia. Workers are loading a giant tanker with liquefied natural gas. Everything is as usual. But there is one difference. This gas is not destined for the US. For the first time in 30 years, Canada is turning its energy ship in the opposite direction. Instead of the traditional route south, it is heading strictly east: Japan, South Korea, China. That is where billions of dollars that used to go to America are now headed. And if you think this is just another deal, you are wrong. This is the beginning of the biggest energy divorce in North American history.
After Trump imposed those sweeping 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel imports, the European Union retaliating with tariffs on up to $28 billion of U.S. goods. Trump making it clear this isn't over, vowing to respond in kind with sweeping retaliatory tariffs early next month.
The next day in Washington, panic ensues. An emergency meeting is convened at the White House. The tariffs introduced in the spring have unexpectedly backfired on the U.S. Previously, Canada supplied almost all of its gas to America, through pipelines, cheaply, almost unconditionally. But now it has a new route, a new market, and a new role. No more suppliers by default. Now it is an independent player that dictates the terms. No loud statements, no sanctions, no threats, just silence and departure to Asia.
US President Donald Trump has announced a 25% tariff on all car and light truck imports into the country. It's due to come into effect on April 2nd. Economists and world leaders are warning that it will be a tax on consumers and have a chilling effect on the global economy. But to Americans, Trump paints a rosy picture, predicting that the levies will spur growth.
What happened? Why did America's largest ally suddenly turn its back on it? Why have gas prices in Minnesota and Michigan skyrocketed by 30%, and local power plants are urgently looking for alternatives? And what does the inconspicuous pipeline construction in the mountains of British Columbia, which began back in 2012, have to do with it? The answer is simple but frightening. Canada was preparing, silently. For years it's been building its energy independence. It has signed contracts with the Japanese. It has negotiated with indigenous peoples. It has invested in green technologies. And at the right moment it struck, quickly, silently, but right on target.
I think you're going to remember today, it's going to be a free nation that we're dealing with. We're going to have a very free and beautiful nation. It's going to be Liberation Day in America, and it's going to be a day that hopefully you're going to look back in years to come and you're going to say, you know, he was right. This has turned out to be one of the most important days in the history of our country.
In this video, you will learn why gas from Canada is now bypassing the US, how Asia lured a reliable supplier, why China signed contracts until 2040 despite all the political differences, and most importantly, where this will lead. For America, for the world, and for everyone who pays their heating bills.
And police in Italy are investigating possible arson after a fire destroyed more than a dozen Tesla vehicles. Elon Musk is calling the incident at a Rome dealership terrorism. This comes as Tesla has been the target of recent protests around the world.
This is not just exports. It is a signal, a shift in the balance of power. The world is becoming multipolar, and even the most loyal allies are choosing their own path. Today it is gas. Tomorrow it will be technology, oil, and rare earth metals. The question is not who is right. The question is who will be able to adapt first. Stay with us. It's only going to get tougher.
After weeks of whiplash, Trump threatening tariffs, imposing some, and walking back others, many Americans are feeling the uncertainty. In Swisher, Iowa, distillery owner Jeff Quint says it's paralyzing.
The bourbon industry is going to be collateral damage in this tariff war. I don't really think there's any way around that.
And he's not alone. Tonight, the majority of Americans, 61%, now say they disapprove of how the president is handling tariffs. 56% say they disapprove of his handling of the economy overall. But the president has dismissed those concerns, tonight saying he has the right to change course.
It all started on a seemingly unremarkable morning on July 1st, 2025. The Canadian port of Kitimat, lost among the forests and mountains of British Columbia, suddenly found itself at the epicenter of the biggest energy shift in decades. A huge tanker loaded with liquefied natural gas slowly pulls away from the shore. Its destination is not the usual southern route to the US, but across the Pacific Ocean, straight to Japan, South Korea, and China. Although visually indistinguishable from any other shipment, this is essentially a moment of energy revolution. With this tanker, Canada is forever changing its role in the global energy order.
Is that ready? The higher the tariff, the more likely it is that the company will come into the United States and build a factory in the United States so it doesn't have to pay the tariff.
That will take many, as you know, that will take many years.
In fact, I'll tell you, there's another theory is that the tariff, you make it so high, so horrible, so obnoxious that they'll come right away. When I do the 10%, 10% is really, first of all, 10% when you collect it is hundreds of billions of dollars. The numbers that you're talking, all reducing our deficit. But really, so there's two ways of looking at a tariff. You can do it as a money-making instrument, or you can do it as something to get the companies. Now, if you want the companies to come in.
For decades, almost 100% of Canadian natural gas went south through a system of pipelines connecting the fields of Alberta and British Columbia to the industrial states of the US. The American market was stable, predictable, and logistically convenient. And Canada, in Washington's eyes, was perceived as nothing more than an energy appendage, a partner from whom gas could be purchased at a reduced price without fear of competition. This continued until March 2025, when the White House administration imposed a 10% tariff on natural gas imports from Canada, accompanied by a statement about protecting the domestic market. The decision, dictated by political calculations and internal pressure from American producers, became the trigger that Canada used with cold precision.
With Elon Musk's views on weighing into very much national politics, national elections in Europe. And then on top of that, when you see the backdrop of Tesla upgrading its product line and the impact of them trying to chase more sales at the back end of last year, that means it's short on inventory. It can't necessarily sell as many vehicles or doesn't have as many in stock to sell. So there is that issue there of a confluence of impacts, which means that sales have been falling. Again, the question is how much more that will impact into February as well, given that the back end of last year, in 2024, Tesla sales did slip overall.
The official response was restrained. There were no loud press conferences or accusatory headlines. There was only one statement from the Canadian Ministry of Natural Resources, made almost in passing: "We are opening up new export opportunities in international markets." But behind this dry phrase lay a huge amount of preparation. 670 kilometers of new coastal gas-linked pipeline, built despite protests, lawsuits, and extremely difficult terrain. A gas liquefaction plant in Kitimat, equipped with new generation Japanese technology, powered exclusively by hydroelectricity and minimizing CO2 emissions. Contracts with Japanese, Chinese, and Korean traders, signed long before the crisis but activated right now. Canada did not improvise, it waited for the right moment. And it waited.
That's a 10. That's a good one.
Shock in the White House. In the morning intelligence briefing, the US president receives a brief report. Canada has begun full-scale LNG deliveries to Asia. Volumes that were previously destined for the northern states are now contracted to Tokyo and Seoul. The first 2.66 million tons have already left. According to a leak from a former energy advisor, President Trump angrily throws a folder of documents against the wall. They betrayed us. These good neighbors, we built a market for them, and they sold out to Tokyo. These words were not spoken in public, but they perfectly convey the atmosphere in Washington, a sense of surprise, anger, and powerlessness.
We begin with the president's trade war escalating tonight. This evening, the retaliation against the United States, Canada, and the European Union responding quickly, just hours after President Trump's 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum coming into the United States. Canada, the largest supplier of steel to the U.S., slapping new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods that are sold in Canada. And the 27 countries of the European Union imposing retaliatory tariffs on up to $28 billion worth of U.S. goods sold in Europe.
And indeed, the consequences began to be felt within a couple of weeks. Utility companies in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota are receiving notices from suppliers about price increases of 18 to 27% for the winter period. There are no alternative suppliers in sufficient quantities, and domestic gas production in these states is either unprofitable or environmentally blocked. Protests are breaking out in some counties, with people demanding explanations as to why they will have to pay hundreds of dollars more for heating in winter. Local TV stations are discussing the energy chill coming from the north. However, these are only external effects. The real crisis lies within U.S. energy policy. The break with Canada turned out to be not only commercial but also ideological. America has lost more than just a supplier. It has lost a mechanism of control. It has lost the leverage that for decades held Ottawa's ambitions in check. And now that Canada has found an alternative, the US can no longer dictate terms. It is worth noting that some of Canada's moves have been downright bold. According to an unnamed source in the Department of Energy, in April 2025, Canadian delegations held confidential talks in Seoul, where they promised South Korea exclusive terms for LNG supplies over the next 5 years in exchange for investment in expanding the Kitimat terminal's capacity. The condition, absolute confidentiality until the launch of the first tanker. This explains why the US did not have time to react in advance. Canada deliberately played silent, hiding its key deals. Some analysts call this an energy blitzkrieg. Within 3 months from March to June, Ottawa activated all its logistics hubs, launched a new route, redirected billions of dollars, and undermined the US market with supplies. It is difficult to imagine a more cold-blooded and precisely calculated move in the energy history of the last decade. But behind the outward calm lies a much deeper meaning. Canada, which had always followed the US on strategic issues, has effectively put an end to its energy dependence. Without shouting, without ultimatums, without an official break, it simply ceased to be dependent. And that is the main blow. Because now even the White House recognizes that it will be almost impossible to turn back. Questions are beginning to multiply. What next? Will Canada sign similar agreements with India and Vietnam? Will it become a new Asian hub for LNG, taking customers away from American terminals in Texas and Louisiana? What if Mexico follows Canada's lead against the backdrop of Washington's attempts to introduce new agricultural tariffs? The answers are unclear. But one thing is clear, North America's energy map no longer looks the same. And even if gas from Canada is flowing quietly and without making headlines, it is in this silence that a new era is being born. An era in which the US is losing not only resources but also control. When the first ships carrying Canadian LNG began arriving in Asia, on the other side of the world, in Washington, they finally understood this is not a temporary logistical glitch. Not another diplomatic maneuver that can be smoothed over with diplomacy. This is a new reality. But what hurt even more was that Asia has long been ready for this reality. While the US was trying to squeeze Canada with taxes, Japan, South Korea, and China were putting long-term contracts on the table. These were not just purchases but multi-billion-dollar agreements with 15-year terms, bonuses for stable supplies, and joint investments in infrastructure. And all of them are with Canada, without a single mention of the United States. In Tokyo, an operational energy headquarters was formed under the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry by the beginning of 2025. Its goal is to find a new stable partner that will not be drawn into sanctions, wars, and political turmoil. After prolonged supply disruptions from Australia and a catastrophic drop in LNG imports from Indonesia due to internal protests, the Japanese can no longer afford to be dependent on unstable regions. Canada proved to be the ideal option: environmentally friendly generation, a Western legal system, and, importantly, a shared antipathy toward recent US trade barriers. Japan was the first to sign a contract for the supply of 20 million tons of LNG annually starting in 2026, enough to provide gas to more than 15 million homes. Moreover, the Japanese side demanded a special condition: priority supplies in the event of a global shortage, even if this would be to the detriment of North American customers. This provision, although not publicized, became a red rag to Washington, where it was perceived as a direct exclusion of the US from the equation. South Korea went even further. Seoul offered Ottawa participation in a joint program to build a new LNG storage facility on the south coast, with an investment of $2.4 billion and a share in future profits. All this is part of a 10-year plan to increase the national gas reserve by 50%. But the key part of the deal is the reduction in the delivery route. While gas from the US used to take 18 to 21 days to reach Asia via the Panama Canal, it will now take just 10 days from Kitimat in Canada. For the energy sector, where every week can cost billions, this advantage proved decisive. South Korea's energy minister, speaking in a closed circle, called Canada the new energy Japan of the Pacific Rim, a country capable of becoming a pillar of East Asian energy balance. China acted more quietly but more harshly. Back in January, several months before Canada's energy break with the US, Chinese company Sinopower Global signed a 100 billion yuan agreement with Canadian consortium LNG Canada for deliveries until 2040. Unlike Japan and South Korea, the Chinese were interested not only in gas but also in technology. Under the terms of the contract, the Chinese side will gain access to some of Canada's ultra-low temperature liquefaction technology in exchange for investment in the expansion of Phase 2 of the LNG Canada project. Within Beijing, this contract was referred to as nothing less than a triple strike: gas, technology, and a political trump card against Washington. But the most dangerous thing about this situation for the US is not the contracts themselves. It is the meaning behind them. All three of Asia's largest economies have unanimously turned away from American logistics, diplomatic gains, and tariff traps toward a more reliable, environmentally acceptable, and, as it turns out, strategically independent Canada. And if energy used to be built around American hubs, Texas, Louisiana, Houston, now the center of gravity, has shifted toward Western Canada. This shift is not huge geographically, but symbolically it is enormous. With this shift, America began to lose much more than just customers. It began to lose ground. Since the launch of Canadian maritime exports, analysts have recorded a 17% decline in interest in American LNG hubs among Asian traders. Several large trading houses from Singapore and Hong Kong, which previously worked exclusively with Texas, have begun to shift their activities to Vancouver and Calgary. One of the largest players in the market, Pacific Gate Logistics, officially closed its Houston office in June 2025 and opened a new one in Kitimat. This signal was perceived in Washington as a symbol of a quiet flight of capital. In this reality, American energy officials began to ask dangerous questions. Are we losing our status as a hub? Unfortunately, the answer became obvious. Until recently, the US was the oil and gas valve of the entire continent. Open it, and the flow began. Close it, and the markets froze. But now that Canada has a sea route, its own refineries, and alternative buyers, no valve is needed anymore. New routes have emerged, and with them, new rules. But what makes this situation particularly painful for the White House is not only the geopolitical damage, but also the destruction of trust. The very trust on which decades of close cooperation were built. America has always considered Canada an ally that would never go against it. And now, when this ally is making a sharp turn without warning, without consultation, without informing anyone, it is perceived as a betrayal, not even in terms of politics, but in terms of strategy. Canadian officials have refrained from making any loud comments, but one of them, according to rumors, said at a closed briefing, "We have not left the US, we have simply grown up." And today, in the White House, this phrase sounds like a death sentence. Meanwhile, Asia is rolling out the red carpet. In July, the first flight carrying a high-ranking Canadian delegation landed at Tokyo Airport. Against a backdrop of flags, a new memorandum on strategic energy partnership is signed. This event may be only the first of dozens to follow. The world seems to be shifting its poles once and for all. The center of gravity of energy policy now lies not between Washington and Houston, but between Kitimat and Yokohama. While emergency meetings continue in the US and anti-crisis working groups are being set up, Canada itself is forming not just an export strategy, but a whole new model for its energy future, one that is independent, sustainable, and politically savvy. The Canadian LNG Canada project, which for many years seemed too large and ambitious, has suddenly begun to take on not only economic but also symbolic significance. Previously viewed as a purely commercial venture, it is now becoming a flagship of Canadian energy sovereignty. And those who usually go unnoticed, the Indigenous peoples of British Columbia, have played a key role in this breakthrough.